Sonic Adventure 2 is many people's favourite Sonic game, and it's a title we weren't sure would even release. In 2001, we learned that Sega would be ceasing production of the Dreamcast from March, so we had to wonder whether they'd still bring Sonic Adventure 2 to an officially dead platform that June. While Sonic Adventure saw a very loud and in-your-face marketing campaign you simply couldn't get away from, the run-up to Adventure 2 was eerily quiet, almost somber. Nevertheless, I saved up pocket money from chores, kept hold of my birthday money, and popped along to Electronics Boutique with my little brother on launch day, unsure whether the game had actually come out. Thankfully, there was an entire wall of them and a queue of enthusiastic Sega fans that had a real sense of optimistic camaraderie. Sega was still making games. They were confident we'd be seeing more of not just Sonic, but Jet Set Radio, Skies of Arcadia, Crazy Taxi, and Shenmue. Do you want to tell them, or should I? As for the game itself, I have mixed opinions, which I'll explain as we take a look at the Dreamcast, GameCube, and HD versions of it today. Lots of changes were made for the sequel. Last time we had 6 playable characters, 7 counting Supersonic, each with their own gameplay style and story campaign. And this time we still have 6 characters, but there are 3 gameplay styles and 2 main campaigns which follow different teams. In the blue corner we have Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles, but in the red corner we have a playable Robotnik who's joined by newcomers Shadow and Rouge. Back in the day, this felt really weird to me. Tails had been taken from running and flying to being stuffed into a mech as Robotnik's foil. Sort of like he inherited Sonic's hand-me-down while the Hedgehog tangled with the hot new villain. Shadow probably kickstarted a lot of our edgelord emo phases, but for good reason. He was cool, calculated, and self-assured. He was in control the entire time, even manipulating Robotnik while letting the Doctor think he was calling the shots and running the show. He even achieved his objective, and it's only due to a last-minute realization and change of allegiance that it wasn't seen through. He had a complete and satisfying arc that Sega have since sadly only been able to repeat ad nauseum, rather than build upon. Even at 12 years old, I could instantly see Knuckles was Piccolo and Shadow was Vegeta. I could talk about this guy at length, but Nick the Game Apologist already has a fantastic video that deep dives the character, which I'll link to in the description. I actually think Rouge doesn't get the credit or attention she deserves. I love that she outright calls Shadow out on his pretentious brooding, and the two have a great dynamic that continues into future games, Team Dark for life. She's got this weird mother-hen vibe. For all her sarcastic quips and double-crossing, she seems to genuinely have everyone's best interests at heart, regardless which side they're on, evidenced by willingly handing her Master Emerald shards over to Knuckles, another character she bounces off of really well. I don't know, she always just seems to be having fun with it in her own way. There's a running theme of rivalry, mirror matches, and doppelgangers throughout Sonic Adventure 2 that's even present in its gameplay. Sonic and Shadow play similarly to the speed stages from Adventure 1. They still practically snap to position when turning and are fairly responsive, but some changes under the hood make them much more fiddly and uncertain to control. In the first game, the spin dash could be performed almost instantly, while the light speed dash had to be charged up first. That's been swapped around for the sequel, as the spin dash requires a short charge that can break forward momentum, while the light speed dash is an immediate single button press action. There are 2 big issues with the light speed dash. First and foremost, it's still entirely circumstantial and artificial. It's still clunkily forced into the design, a solution to a problem the developers chose to make in the first place. Secondly, it just flat out doesn't work half the time, and that's partly because all of Sonic and Shadow's moves share the same contextual button. The action button is used for rolls, spin dashes, light speed dashes, interacting with objects such as switches, and moves unlocked later into the game such as the bounce attack. This led to multiple situations where I intended to perform one move, but instead a different one came out. For example, going to light speed dash over a pit, but bounce attacking into it instead. Considering the Dreamcast has 4 face buttons and 2 triggers, there's absolutely no need for this. It created an odd tension and uncertainty where I never felt confident or in control. I was constantly worried I'd take a death through the frankly awkward control scheme rather than anything of my own doing. That's not the only element that suffers. The homing attack, which I couldn't fault in the original, sometimes fails to find its target, again placing me in precarious situations that ultimately feel unfair. Sonic Team continued trying to fix what wasn't broken by introducing grind rails to the formula. Now, these have become a mainstay staple of the series since, but this first implementation isn't great. You can't homing attack to them, and you're sometimes expected to jump between them, landing on a knife's edge at high speeds with twitchy movement controls. They also suffer from some really funky momentum that kills the pace and just makes you, the player, feel a bit lame. When it works well, it's just that too often what's intended to look and feel like this instead results in, well, this. To go on a minor tangent, some people think the grinding was introduced solely because of a sponsorship deal with Soap Shoes, which you can see Sonic wearing in this game. However, there's evidence to suggest the Soap deal occurred much later into development. Specifically, there's a demo version of this game featuring grind rails, where Sonic's still wearing his classic footwear. Moving on to Tails and Robotnik, they borrow E102's gameplay style, which you might remember I had high praise for, but with some key differences. The time limit's gone, so your sole incentive for racking up massive combos is simply getting a higher score. Their walkers are much bigger than E102's comparatively smaller frame, giving you a larger hitbox, less visibility, and an overall slower experience. I did find the targeting laser would oftentimes cut out and lose all of my lock-ons even though I was firmly holding the button down. It happened at least once in all versions, eliminating the possibility of a controller fault, and annoyed me every time. The main thing holding Tails and Robotnik's stages back are the level designs. Enemy and trap placement are issues in this game as a whole. You'll get hit by stuff that's off screen or which literally drops on top of you without warning, but when you combine that with stages that turn the lights off, punish you for taking the obvious path forwards, or expects you to target enemies without also hitting explosives that will blow up platforms you need, or open up vacuums into space with an imprecise aiming mechanism, I start getting a bit tilted. Both characters have a section where you'll naturally go forwards, only to be blocked by an obstacle that has to be cleared with a rocket, switch, or item behind you, but it doesn't let you rotate the camera. Now you're doing that awkward Crash Bandicoot moving towards the screen with no visibility thing, and this is seemingly by design. This was the developer's intent. Another complaint that extends beyond these characters, but I encountered the most during their stages, is the length of some of these levels. This one is nearly 10 minutes, yet I still got the highest ranking, something I'll talk about more later, showing the game thinks that was a good run. In the classic Sonics, you got a time over and lost a life if you were still in a level after 10 minutes. They absolutely outstay their welcome. Knuckles and Rouge can face similar problems. The treasure hunting gameplay returns after Knuckles destroys the Master Emerald, and damn it, Knuckles, we talked about this! That coastal town had just rebuilt after the last 3 times! Sorry, as I was saying, the gameplay style returns, but again with some differences. The radar only shows one object at a time instead of all 3. This means you can be right on top of an emerald shard and not get a reading yet because the game prefers you to find them in a linear order. Some players like this change, I'm not one of them. If I got stuck trying to find a particular shard in the first game, I often got a boost of encouragement by finding a different one and coming back around. I can't really do that here. Instead, I have to go crazy trying to find the piece that should be right here, why isn't it, before I can move on. There are monitors that give you hints, but I usually find these are only useful if you already know the level pretty well and can make sense of what they're saying. Shards hidden in walls or underground can also present an issue, as you end up furiously digging around trying to find that one sweet spot where the emerald is. Thankfully, the GameCube version adds an exclamation mark over the character's head to give you a better idea of its location. I'm also put off because of the size and layout of these environments. All of them are split into multiple sections that sometimes only have one route for travelling between them. The worst offender here are the pyramid stages. The simple act of navigation often becomes a pain, and I found my footage was split by myself pausing and selecting exit game on Rouge's levels. I genuinely facepalmed when I remembered Security Hall has a 5-minute time limit. I actively dreaded playing Rouge's Mad Space on each of my free runs to the point I found myself putting off recording any more gameplay footage. This tries some Super Mario Galaxy stuff way ahead of the plumber's attempts, and the resulting impact on the camera and controls is simply vomit-inducing. This had me raging and swearing at my TV. Likewise, the final battle as Super Sonic and Super Shadow got my blood boiling on Dreamcast. I think a final boss should be one last test of mastery, asking you to display everything you've learned throughout the game, but Sonic titles have a really nasty habit of throwing a brand new gameplay style at you for the sake of spectacle instead. It felt like the lasers had no discernible patterns, I didn't have the freedom of movement I needed, and it was a very awkward and cumbersome experience overall. That said, I think Final Hazard got nerfed in later releases as I beat the boss first try without much effort by the time I was recording footage of the PlayStation 3 version. That, or it's a case of practice makes perfect. By the way, this hand gesture they do while transforming, yeah, it has a very particular meaning in Britain, and it's not good. Generally speaking, my experience improved dramatically with each playthrough. After my Dreamcast run, I was genuinely worried I'd have to give a scathingly negative review to a game I remember loving as a kid. But by the time I finished my PS3 run, where I had a better feel for the level layouts, enemy placements, and boss patterns, things were starting to click for me and I was actually having some fun again. There's actually much less to say for version differences this time around. There are some graphical changes, the lighting takes a hit from the GameCube onwards, such as the lack of shadows from Sonic's jail bars, and in this scene in Green Forest, I can see the edges of the polygons on Sonic's belly, which is even more noticeable on the HD versions. The lens flare and helicopter blades are completely missing in this part of the opening too. The models are updated for the GameCube release, but most of the cutscenes still use the Dreamcast ones anyway. As a side note, I'm not a fan of Sonic's silhouette in this game. His brow's too prominent and jagged, while his spines look too narrow from most angles, leading to an overall lankier beanpole look. I genuinely think he looked far better in the previous title. Some textures have been replaced, mostly on computer screens, one of which removes the cutscene's foreshadowing, but generally speaking the changes aren't as significant as they were between the base Sonic Adventure and Sonic Adventure DX, with the vast majority of them here being ultimately inconsequential. Of course, there are lots of websites and videos out there chronicling each and every little difference if you're curious. The main additions were made to the multiplayer mode, with 21 new stages being added for the GameCube. Now, I'm not usually one for multiplayer, but I did manage to rope my 6-year-old son into recording some footage with me, and we actually had a good time. In fact, we recorded way more footage than I'll be able to use. He even beat me once or twice. What? How have you found that emerald? No. Ah! It doesn't have any staying power, and most people would probably play a dedicated multiplayer game before reaching for this. But if you had a sibling and this was your only game growing up, I can see how these modes would have provided a lot of fond memories. Of course, if you want these extra multiplayer stages, plus Chow Karate for the Chow Garden, which, come on, why wouldn't you want that? In the HD release, you have to fork over more cash for the DLC. Yeah, they carved content out of the GameCube version to resell to you in the HD version. Again. Outside of that, it's admittedly hard to fault the HD version. It's actually in proper widescreen this time, although some cutscenes which are pre-rendered or have overlaid special effects are still in 4:3. From my experience, it's probably the way to go in terms of cost, availability, and features. Whichever version you play, you're going to need those subtitles on. The audio mixing is terrible, and it's hard to make out what characters are saying, especially Robotnik. It feels like trying to have a chat in a loud club.
This makes things a whole lot easier. Hurry, go back to Earth and find them fast. I want that Chaos Emerald!
Did you get that?
Even if the audio mixing was okay, characters cut each other off constantly or react prematurely because the lip syncing matches the Japanese voiceovers, not the English dub. It's actually a pretty poor localization in that regard.
Mysteriously, the only thing that was stolen was the
Emerald?
Chaos Emerald.
Weird note on the subtitles. Sonic 1 used a translucent background to increase contrast and readability, but this sequel just opts for a drop shadow that can make things very hard to read in certain scenes. They do use the overlay for subtitles during levels though, so the asset's there, they just chose not to use it for cutscenes for whatever reason. Meanwhile, the pre-rendered FMVs just don't have any subtitles at all. It certainly loses a lot of points for lacking basic inclusion and accessibility features. I mean, come on, what is this, the original release of the Spyro Reignited trilogy? Haha! Sonic Adventure 2 seems to be built on a core idea of replayability and recycling content. You can see the final cutscene of the unlockable third story in around 5 hours, but the good news is it lacks much of the padding of its predecessor, instead finding its own ways of providing a value proposition. There are no more hubs, instead you have a linear stage-to-stage progression. It makes sense for the story this game's trying to tell, and while I noted I spent only half of my time with the original actually playing stages, here the majority of those 5 hours were gameplay, an objective improvement. That comes at a detriment to flow and player agency though. In the previous entry, I could choose to play as just Sonic. I could get in the zone, find a rhythm, and have a great time. Here, the other gameplay styles are mandatory, and I'm forced to constantly switch between them during the story mode. Just as I'm getting used to Shadow's handling and starting to have fun, I have to switch over to Robotnik and start engaging an entirely different skill set. Some people like the variety, but it honestly just throws me off. It also means speedrunners are forced to deal with the random nature of the treasure hunting stages. They can mitigate it to an extent by memorizing hints and seeds, but it's nigh on impossible to have a fair race or leaderboard. Luck's going to play into your run one way or another. I find that strange given the original Sonic the Hedgehog's design philosophy came from speedrunning Mario's World 1-1. In fairness, there is a level select, and after beating the game, there's nothing stopping me from playing just Sonic and Shadow's stages. This is where we see the next attempt at lengthening the game. Missions. Every level has 5 missions. The first is beaten by just reaching the goal in story mode, and the others range from things like collecting 100 rings to finding hidden Chow. The Chow missions specifically require an optional upgrade called the Mystic Melody. With no hub worlds, the upgrades are now hidden in normal stages with optional accessories, often in areas that you can't access on your first run as you don't yet have certain mandatory upgrades. These vary in usefulness. Knuckles' air necklace is essential for the final stage where he's underwater throughout, but Sonic gets magic hands that allows him to grab an enemy and throw them at another one. I have no footage of me using this move because I literally never did. Why would I when I have the homing attack? Once you have the Mystic Melody, you can find a small plinth in a stage, play the tune, and something will happen that leads to the Chow. Some of these are well hidden. Others you'll pass right by on your normal playthrough. The amount of effort put into these certainly isn't equal. These missions are the first barrier to completion for me. Tails and Rouge each have a karting stage. One of the missions is don't hit any walls, which, with these controls is, no. Another mission is don't hit any cars, and, what exactly am I supposed to do in this narrow tunnel? That, and I never want to play Mad Space ever again, please don't make me do it. The other major barrier comes in the form of the ranking system, which also became a series staple after this. When you complete a stage, you get graded. A's the best, E's the worst. Your ranking is based on your score, with bonuses for a quick completion time and high ring count. I can't figure this system out. Sometimes I have an awful run and I get an A, other times I finish what I thought was a decent run and get a D. Your score resets to 0 if you die, so you might as well exit and restart the level if you take a death. Likewise, the game loves dropping an enemy or hazard on you right at the finish line, making you lose all of your rings and any hope of an A ranking. The game's cheapness is front and center when you're going for these. Enemies that shoot you out with a homing attack, these damn artificial chaos monsters, enemies that are off screen or behind a door, fighter jets that carpet bomb you, it's all here. I think the ending of Mission Street just might be the worst culprit. Dropping enemies behind you, having a jet attack, and then a piece of highway dropped on you. Mate, off with that. You'll also be fighting glitches that send you out of bounds to your death, the fiddly controls I mentioned earlier where the lightspeed dash just does not work, and instances where the game purposefully misleads you. Here, I'm playing as Sonic in a gravity puzzle. I'm trying to go up to the blue section, seemingly the intended route forwards, and I'm dying every time. Turns out, I had to go down to the side of the yellow section, an area that was completely off screen. screen. Also as Sonic, here I defeat some bad guys and have an artificial chaos hovering over a bottomless pit. I homing attack him and look for another enemy or a trail of rings to chain off of, as the game's trained me to do, find nothing and die. Turns out, I have to kill the monster and do a 180 back to where I came from, where a locked door the camera never showed me has now opened. Getting A's across the board unlocks Green Hill Zone as a secret level that I've never gotten to play. I'm showing someone else's footage here because nope, I am not putting myself through the hell of getting A ranks and you can't make me. That said, I find it amusing getting to play Green Hill again was once considered an awesome completion reward, considering we're now sick of seeing it in literally every Sonic game. While playing through these levels time and time again, you'll probably realise how often assets are reused, with many of the dark story stages feeling like hard mode variants of their hero counterparts. Green Forest and White Jungle, Prison Lane and Iron Gate, Death Chamber and Egg Quarters all come to mind, but that's far from an exhaustive list. I found myself wanting some more variety, especially during the hero story, which has 3 pyramid levels back to back, followed by 4 consecutive Space Colony Arc levels. Sonic Adventure 1 was even more guilty of this, recycling wholesale levels and giving each character exclusive access to parts of them. Sonic might not be able to reach or use Big's fishing spots or Knuckles' rooftops, but he would go past and see them. It was much more of a Sonic 3 and Knuckles approach. At least here, the level layouts are unique to each character, right? Here's the thing, having multiple characters use the same level in different ways made SA1 feel open and organic. You could see much more of the stage at any one time, and the hubs and other characters provided context for how it fit into Sonic's world. It was easy to envision people actually living there or the environment serving an actual purpose. Sonic Adventure 2's levels feel much more video gamey in that they're clearly a series of blocks and platforms with differently themed textures applied. They're much more corridor-like with more right angles, walls, and a narrower field of view. They're impractical and lack the multi-purpose designs we saw before. They feel like an artificial obstacle course at a theme park rather than a real environment Sonic happens to be passing through. As a result, they're far less believable and immersive. In a way, SA1's level design philosophy reminds me of Spyro the Dragon's more open-ended approach, while SA2 makes me think of Crash Bandicoot's linear gauntlets. Your preference is ultimately going to come down to subjective taste, but for me, this ain't it. We also have the return of rival battles, forcing you to repeat certain encounters as each combatant. These are still tedious and often result in wailing on each other, the equivalent of smacking action figures together. On the Dreamcast, it took me a good 8 minutes to beat Shadow because I was brute forcing him. The first 3 hits, you just homing attack him, but he starts to block that for hits 4 and 5. What you're supposed to do is wait for his Chaos Sphere and then counter while he's vulnerable, but he only does that when he's really far ahead, and with your comparative running speeds, that's only going to happen if you purposefully back off. It's not intuitive at all. This is on top of regular boss battles being reused. Sonic, Shadow, and Rouge all fight what's essentially the same gun mech, while Sonic and Robotnik both fight the same egg golem, albeit in different ways. Like the original, this sequel's guilty of desperately trying to justify its price tag by artificially extending the runtime. I haven't even mentioned the time sink that is the Chow Garden. When I was a kid and I typically only had one game for my birthday and another for Christmas, I was down for that. I had the 40 odd hours to spare. I could dedicate myself to the multiple runs required. As an adult, I'm much more appreciative of a game that knows not to outstay its welcome and respects my increasingly limited free time. Some people are complaining Spider-Man Miles Morales is, quote, only 8 hours long, but to me that's exactly what I'm looking for. My needs have changed, and so has Adventure 2's relative appeal. Games have to make a good first impression. I don't want to be faced with enemies and obstacles I can only reasonably avoid with prior knowledge of past runs. I want a fair and fun challenge the first time through, but SA2 is designed in a way that simply doesn't allow for that. I almost outright cancelled this review a few times because I realised I didn't want to record more gameplay footage. I was avoiding playing more of the game because my experience was showing me just how rose-tinted my memories were. There were times I forced myself through it, and that's not only indicative of a bad game, it's also not healthy. The only reason I went for a second and third playthrough, eventually reaching a point where I was enjoying myself, was to fulfill an obligation to capture footage for the version comparison section of this video. Had I not done that, my opinion of the game would have been much lower, so I've got to recognise that when I'm giving my verdict. It also makes me consider whether doing version comparisons is viable going forwards. I think for games like Sonic Adventure to Sonic Adventure DX, where there is a significant difference, yes, absolutely. But for titles like this, and later down the road, Sonic Heroes, Shadow the Hedgehog, which are more just multi-platform with minor changes, it's not worth capturing the extra 10 or so hours of footage for a section that maybe lasts 2 minutes in the final video. Worst of all, I know many of you genuinely hold this up as your favourite Sonic game, and I'm kind of jealous you have a much better experience with it than I do. While I've seen firsthand how multiple playthroughs where you learn the game inside and out can improve things dramatically, games need to earn that level of dedication. I need to have such a great time on my first run that I want to come back for more. Yet in this instance, it wasn't until my third playthrough that things finally started improving. By then, it's frankly far too late for me. This honestly wasn't the outcome I was expecting when I decided to review this game. However, I hope you can see how I came to the conclusion I did. I'm kind of glad that we will be taking a short break from Sonic as we look at some underrated games I think have flown under the radar, starting with Galarians. Now, hopefully, we don't have a repeat where this ends up being far worse than I remember. But fingers crossed, check back in with me, and hopefully we'll have a good time with this one. In the meantime, you can support the channel by subscribing, liking, commenting, hitting the notification bell, all that other weird stuff YouTube makes you do these days because algorithm. And if you want to support me outside of this odd Google-owned platform, I do have a Discord and a Patreon. Once again, thank you very much for watching. I'm looking forward to jumping into Galarians with you, and I'll see you next time.